It is here in Berlin where the wall emerges most clearly. Here, cutting across your city, where the news photo and the television screen have imprinted this brutal division of a continent upon the mind of the world. Standing before the Brandenburg Gate, every man is a German, separated from his fellow men. Every man is a Berliner, forced to look upon a scar. In the 1950s, Khrushchev predicted, "We will bury you." But in the West today, we see a free world that has achieved a level of prosperity and well-being unprecedented in all human history. In the communist world, we see failure, technological backwardness, declining standards of health, even want of the most basic kind, too little food. Even today, the Soviet Union still cannot feed itself. After these 4 decades, then, there stands before the entire world one great and inescapable conclusion. Freedom leads to prosperity. Freedom replaces the ancient hatreds among nations with comity and peace. Freedom is the victor. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
So Ronald Reagan goes over in front of the wall, which was, he said, was a scar of tyranny in the world. He goes over to the wall and he stands up for freedom. See, I think this is important. I think this is an important anniversary because it reminds us how precious our country is, how precious our individual rights are. But it will not last unless it is fought for. It will not last unless we work for it. See, one reason the Soviet Union was able to fall like it did, not only because communism doesn't work and tyranny is a failure, but because leaders like Ronald Reagan went over there, stood without fear, and proclaimed the beauty of freedom. They stood without fear and said to those who promote tyranny and oppression, "We will defeat you." You know, he mentioned how Khrushchev said communism, the Soviet Union will one day bury us, and he says freedom is the victor. Freedom will be the victor. And I say this not only to remind you of the past, but so you think of the future. You think, there are terrorists today who want to destroy freedom. There are countries out there today who are destroying freedom for their own people. But they must be reminded of the Berlin Wall falling, because they must be reminded that even though they will fight against freedom, freedom will be the victor. Because freedom allows the ability of individuals to stand up. Freedom allows the individual to be able to stand up. And what happens when individuals are free? Certain leaders like Ronald Reagan come and fight for it. We will continue to fight for any enemy of freedom will be fought against. Freedom is the victor. So, I thank you for joining me. If you have any comments about what I have to say, you can instant message me at Radio WNSC, or you can send me an email at michael.yaffee@knights.ucf.edu. I'm gonna take a break here and just play a song. You are listening, and I'll be back. When I get back, I'm gonna talk about, since my teacher didn't think I knew about that, I'm going to talk about other leaders who stood up against the Soviet oppression on to mark the anniversary of the falling of the Berlin Wall. You are listening to the Michael Yaffee program, WNSC.UCF.edu online radio. To the Michael Yaffee program, WNSC.UCF.edu online radio. I thank you guys for joining me. I was talking about, since it's the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, I put you a speech from Ronald Reagan, and I was talking about how freedom was the victor against the tyranny of Soviet Union. Even though some thought they had a stronger military, we didn't even have to defeat them militarily. It was just our ideas, our way of life. The idea of freedom overcame, and the people of the Soviet Union stood up with the help of leaders from countries around the world also stood up. And one of those, my teacher was kind of ranting today about how it wasn't just Ronald Reagan, it was, Pope John Paul II had a lot to do with it in his visit to Poland. So I wanted to give him credit as well. I'm going to, quote a lot of leaders who stood in tyranny. But this is from Time magazine, Monday, June 18th, 1979. It's entitled A Triumphal Return. It was like a carnival, a political campaign, a crusade, and an enormous Polish wedding all in one. Almost from the moment his Alitalia 727 plane deposited Pope John Paul II in Warsaw, and he knelt in his gleaming white cassock to kiss the earth of Poland, his countrymen converged upon him in a joyful and dumbfounding millions. Babies brought to be kissed or blessed, grandmothers in bandanas, the teenage young flocking to him like rock fans afflicted with Beatlemania, hard-faced coal miners pampered by the Workers' Party, gathering around him by tens of thousands and roaring out the words of the hymn, Christus vincit, Christ conquers, while the first Polish pope in history of the Catholic Church sang right along with them in his fine baritone. The June air was torn by the peal of church bells, the buzz of helicopters, the crackle of loudspeaker commands, the waves of thundering applause, the melodious drone of old hymns, the murmur of masses being said, dozens of them, beneath the burning sun of an early Polish summer. See, Pope John Paul visited Poland, and this time Poland was under the tyranny of the Soviet Union, under the tyranny of communism. And if you know anything about communism tries to outlaw religion. But a leader like John Paul II decided to stand up for what was right, and he continuously stood against communism and continuously stood up in the name of freedom, and also in the name of God, in the name of Christ. Now, I'm not a Catholic, and I don't necessarily agree with everything the Catholic Church does, but I do respect his ability to go over there and stand up for what is right. Stand up against the oppression of communism. And I talked about this in another show. They try to get rid of God, but you can't get rid of God. This is an example of that as well. The people of Poland, they cried out to the Pope, and not just because he was the Pope, but because they wanted God. They wanted religion. They wanted the belief in Jesus back in their country. And that idea couldn't be contained, even though the government stomped it down. You can't contain God, as I've said before. But I also wanted to highlight there were many leaders who stood up, and they stood up and there's one thing he said here that I'm going to find really quick that showed how bold he was. The Polish ecclesiastical hierarchy held a nationwide meeting to coincide with the Pope's visit. John Paul's speech to a closed-door session was the most significant statement of his trip. In the Christian-Marxist confrontation, the Pope said, "Authentic dialogue must respect the convictions of believers, ensure all the rights of citizens, and also the normal condition for the activity of the Church as a religious community to which the vast majority of Poles belong. The dialogue cannot be easy," he added bluntly, "because it takes place between two concepts of the world that are diametrically opposed." See, right there, he stood up for the rights of the individual to worship and believe in God. And you're probably wondering, all this is great, commemorating the anniversary, but what does it mean to us? This happened in the 80s, the early 90s. What does it mean to us? See, these leaders understood then that freedom is always under attack.